Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Something keeping you up at night? Or maybe it just sits at the edge of your bed while you're asleep, completely unnoticed. So, if you dare, turn off your lights and sit close to your monitors. It's time we get to better know a monster we already do. Torn Apart.
Well, we've been having trouble with the dogs barking at night for days. I've tried keeping them outside, thinking this would help, but they would still bark and whine relentlessly after my wife and I would retire to bed. Unable to identify the source of their unease, I decided to chain them out back once again. At least their barks would be muffled by the barriers of the exterior walls. Although I was correct, the nightly disturbances were still keeping me up. Last night, about 2:30 in the morning, while there seemed to be a commotion in the backyard, I once again made my way downstairs and towards the back patio door. It was when I opened the door that I noticed only Bruce was still barking. Molly, our golden retriever, was silent. At first, I didn't think much of it, but still intrigued by curiosity and driven by frustration regarding my loss of sleep, I made my way into the yard, back towards Bruce. As I neared him, I noticed he was barking in the direction of Molly's chain. Whatever was upsetting him was off in that direction. The air was crisp and the night black, barely a glint of moonlight. But as I stared off towards the other side of the yard, motionless, Bruce growling and whining behind me, I could detect a faint growling from somewhere in the black before me. At first, I thought it was Molly, but as I listened on, I found that it wasn't Molly at all. I know, growling is growling, right? But any dog owner will tell you that not only can they tell the difference between their dog's vocalizations and others, but they can also determine the nature of the noise. Whether it's a bark to go out or one that says there's someone at the fucking door, an owner can tell. Not only was this a vicious, I'm going to kill you growl, it wasn't coming from my dog. Still, I wasn't sure of myself based on my instincts alone, and I found myself walking slowly in the direction of the noise, trying to locate its source. I was about 15 feet away from Molly's doghouse when I saw the tall grass behind it rustle in movement, just after the growling had stopped. Molly's chain was lying on the ground, trailing off into the weeds behind her coop, into the same direction of the now still thicket of grass and thorns. As I approached the end of the chain, by following it upon the ground, the smell of metal and bile began to sink into my nostrils, growing thicker as I grew closer to the weeds. It wasn't until I practically stepped on it that I actually saw it. Molly could not have been making those noises. On the ground at my feet was a bloody, furry mess that took me a moment to identify. It was Molly. She'd literally been torn apart. The sickening smell that invaded my senses were emanating from the stinking pile at my feet. The corpse was mangled beyond recognition, it was only by the color of the fur and Molly's collar lying beside the mess that I was able to identify her. I'm not sure what was in my backyard that night, but I'm damn sure to lock the doors and bring Bruce in at night now.
Tell them about the whispers.
My wife interjected. We were at a house party at the neighbors next door, exchanging information related to the rash of animal mutilations plaguing our community lately. Honey, it was nothing. I tried to avoid the topic, as I really didn't want the neighborhood thinking of me as the local superstitious nut.
Whispers? You didn't mention anything about whispers. Come on, Dave, tell us.
Carl, the host of the party, asked me to elaborate. Well, when I went to go back inside, as soon as I stood up, I heard a strange whispering coming from the woods, beyond the weeds. I informed the guests.
Do you know what the whispers were saying?
Carl's wife pressed. No, they were too faint and garbled to make out clearly, but they were unsettling, almost ethereal and shrill sounding behind the airy quality. I explained.
You don't think it could have been an animal?
Carl asked. Not like any animal I've ever heard. Never heard a deer whisper, man. I jived him. He would have probably given it right back, but didn't out of respect for our recent loss. An animal becomes a member of the family who owns it. The death of a pet can be very painful. I'm sure Carl didn't want to offend me. He dropped the topic of whispering at this point and focused upon the details of the incident and its similarities with the other strange happenings across town. 2 other neighbors of ours have had their pets disappear during the weeks prior to this, and there have been similar reports made across town, information given to me by a friend of mine in the fire department. It was assumed at the time that it was the work of some hungry coyote or wolf, that is, until children started to turn up mutilated. Theories of a hungry animal began to fade, as the most recent victims were adolescent males, fully capable of warding off a coyote or wolf, unless seriously injured first. A hungry animal is not likely to attack a perfectly healthy human that outweighs them. There's too much chance of injury for the animal. Animals typically hunt weakened prey. However, this led to another line of thought. What kind of human could mutilate a child, or animal for that matter, in such a grotesque fashion? I had witnessed the carnage firsthand. It was hard to imagine that a human being could be responsible for such brutality and violence. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before I discovered the truth. A couple of weeks had gone by since the party at Carl and Stacy's house. During that time, the increase in disturbing events prompted much of the community to take refuge in their homes earlier and earlier in the evening. It could easily be derived that children were being allowed to play outside less and less. Our community was in a tight grip of fear. For a while, my wife and I felt as the rest of the community did, secluding ourselves in our supposed fortress of a home. But eventually, it was this exact feeling of security that assisted in our decision to have a night out on the town, shaking the feelings of anxiety and fear, or so we would try. I think the thought of having to stay isolated for safety created a sense of being locked away, prisoners of our own devices. Carl's and Stacy's daughter, Amanda, who was babysitting the night of the get-together at their home, was our babysitter as well. Our daughter, Laura, was still only 18 months old, making a babysitter for our night out a necessity. Although many parents may have had a problem with their children being out at night for any reason at this time, Carl and his wife concluded that they would be near enough in case of any trouble. As far as fear of something supernatural, Carl and his wife, the Hubers, were known skeptics. Their only fears were that of human and tangible threats, things they assumed could be negated due to their close proximity to the children. After work, I showered while my wife prepared snacks for Amanda and finished her makeup. It was getting late in the day when we heard a knock at the door. My wife walked over to open the door for our guest, fixing her right earring while the clack of her heels could be heard crossing the expanse of the hardwood floor. It was Amanda, and as always, she had arrived a few minutes early. I finished combing my hair before grabbing my wallet and keys. I walked downstairs to find my wife gathering her jacket and purse. I greeted Amanda, reminding her that she was welcome to anything in the fridge except the beer, and reminded her of the important numbers to call in case of an emergency. Both my wife and I kissed our daughter goodbye, assured Amanda that we would be home within a few hours, and left the two of them alone watching TV in the living room. Although I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I copped it up to nerves related to the recent incidents and decided to ignore my better judgment. I remember the streets were nearly vacant as we drove into the heart of town. It was a Friday night, and usually traffic was notably thicker, but the fear of a night stalker seemed to have the whole town on edge. Fortunately, due to the lack of night-goers, Tiffany, my wife, and I were seated at a table as soon as we walked into the restaurant. There were a few couples and families scattered about the establishment, but the place is usually jam-packed on a Friday night. My wife and I were doing our best to enjoy our evening, but the constant reminder of the terror that loomed over our town like a rain cloud kept our anxiety elevated. By the time our entrees had arrived, my wife and I had broken down and were about to call home to check in. It was when I reached for my phone that it rang. My pulse immediately quickened as I identified the number on the screen. The tiny cellular screen boasted two thought-gripping words: Hubers calling. I reassured my wife not to panic as I pressed the green button and placed the device to my ear. Although many terrifying scenarios were racing through my mind, I attempted to calm myself with all the benign reasons for the Hubers to be calling. Maybe they just wanted to ask how long we would be before returning home and relieving their daughter of babysitting duty. Maybe they were calling to assure the two of us that everything was okay, that they went over and checked in for us. I immediately knew I was wrong when I heard Carl's panic-stricken voice on the other end of the line.
Dave, don't panic, but Amanda just called me. I'm not sure what's going on, but the power's out at your place.
Carl started. Well, did she say anything else? I asked, the memories of my mutilated dog surfacing to consciousness.
Well, she called saying something about weird noises just before the power went out. I've been trying to call her cell, but there's no answer.
Carl sounded out of breath, his speech choppy as he kept trying to catch his breath.
I'm on my way over there now.
Carl continued. My wife was staring at me now with questioning eyes. I motioned to her that everything was fine and kept listening to my neighbor, anxiously anticipating a report regarding the children. I heard him knock on the door, over and over.
There's no answer,
Carl told me. Look in the mailbox beside the door. I keep a spare key in there, I informed him. At this point, my wife really wanted to know what was going on. My focus on Carl's investigation waned, as I started explaining the situation to my wife. I told her about Amanda's phone, about the power outage, and the lack of response at the door. I started to comfort Tiffany, telling her that it was probably a blown fuse and nothing to get worked up about. That's when I heard Carl gasp. "What's wrong?" I exclaimed into the phone. He didn't respond back. I only heard the loud bang of something colliding with the floor, and then silence. I was just about to hang up and stand to my feet, determined to rush home, when the silence was replaced by an eerie, heavy breathing, giving way only to the sounds of distinct whispering. "We have to go right now," I told my wife with serious conviction. The look on my face prompted her to leap to her feet, throw more than enough money on the table to pay for the meal, and rush by my side to our vehicle in the parking lot outside without so much as a question. As we sped from the lot and into the street, that's when Tiffany began bombarding me with questions. I was doing my best to tell her that there was still nothing to worry about, that Carl hadn't reported anything, only his phone went dead. However, due to my reckless driving and easily identifiable speeding, despite my withholding the information regarding the odd breathing and whispers, Tiffany could easily tell that there was indeed a reason to worry. On the way back, I'm actually very surprised we didn't get pulled over. Police were everywhere due to the recent string of crimes and disappearances, but we must not have passed one on the way home. For if I did, I would have undoubtedly been stopped for greatly exceeding the speed limit. Uninhibited, I pulled into my driveway within a few minutes and came to a sliding stop. I told Tiffany to stay in the car. She wasn't too fond of the idea at first, but I wasn't sure what awaited me inside the black home before me. I ran up to the front door and pushed it open. The door was still ajar from Carl's previous entry. "Carl? Amanda?" No answer. "Oh my God, the baby," I thought to myself. "Laura!" I yelled out, hoping to hear her crying or make some kind of noise in the black. The last I had seen of the two girls was in the living room. Upon inspection, the room was empty. Nothing seemed out of place. It was then that I heard something bang in the kitchen. As I slowly approached the kitchen, another bang, and then another. As I grew closer, the sounds of chewing began to become detectable. Silently, and ever so carefully, I slid my head around the corner of the archway leading to the kitchen. What I saw. I can only describe what I saw as nightmarish at first glance. It looked as though an emaciated and naked man was crouched over Carl's mutilated remains. It seemed to be tearing bits of him off, tearing bits of flesh free from whatever chunk it held in its grasp with its teeth, and then tossing what was left to the side or behind him, making a loud bang sound as the body part collided with the wall or floor. I couldn't help it. I turned away, trying to hold it back, but it wasn't going to happen. The dinner that I had tried to enjoy with the company of my wife was now pouring onto the floor at my feet. The sounds of vomit colliding with the hard wood could be heard amidst the sound of my retching and coughing. Trying like hell to compose myself, I wiped my mouth and continued listening. There were no more sounds coming from the kitchen. Slowly, I once again peered around the corner. As I did, I was greeted with the face of the monster that had been eating my neighbor. Before I could react, it let out a loud screech from its mouth, serrated with dirty red and yellow pointed teeth. Its hands reached for me, fingers extending from its hands like long claws, tipped with talon-like nails. This was no naked man. This was a monster. I tried to run, turning back towards the front door, determined to find my child, and then I felt something grasp my back. That thing had grabbed me as I turned to run. Seemingly, without much effort at all, I was sent flying through the air as if tossed by a bodybuilder. Slamming into the wall at the end of the corridor was the last thing I remember before blacking out. I woke up to the police standing over me. My house was still dark, but now lit with the glow of a dozen flashlights. The flash of red and blue coming from outside the windows. I was the first to ask any questions. "Where's Laura? Where's my baby? Is she okay?" I questioned the cop. I was told that Laura was safe. She was with my wife at the moment. Apparently, Tiffany had called the police while waiting in the car. The police must have chased the monster off by showing up, therefore, probably saving my life. They had found her and Amanda upstairs in Laura's room. Laura was fine, but Amanda was dead. She'd been ripped apart like her father in my kitchen, like my dog in the backyard, and my other dog now in the kitchen next to Carl's body. I don't think Stacy Huber ever fully recovered. She never seemed to quite believe my story, always wanting different answers. Can't say as I blame her. I find it all pretty hard to believe myself. Eventually, the mutilations and disappearances seemed to stop, but no suspect or creature was ever caught. Shortly after the incident, my wife and I placed our house on the market and moved away. Although my family hasn't experienced anything of the sort since we've moved, I can't help but ponder the fate of the little family that just moved in to our old home.
Some stories go straight to your heart, and some just straight up tear it out. And as long as you don't find yourself bleeding on the floor in pieces, make sure to crawl back in again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all next Saturday.